So we will carry on from that. And we're very excited to kind of, kick off this slightly experimental day, I suppose. We've already been going for an hour in the background with some of you on a bit of a networking session, which I hope has been instructive and interesting and allowed you to meet some people and talk a little bit about kind of what you do and what you're hoping to get from today and so on. But we do have a great lineup through the rest of the day. And if I reshare my slides, you can see this agenda. So this morning, we're about to go into this kind of whole session on a welcome and a piece of introduction. And I will be introducing you as well to our wonderful charity we're supporting today, which has been a lovely part of organizing all of this. We will then move into a couple of discussions specifically on motivations and purpose and what that means in business. We've got two great guests to discuss that with you today, but we'll get to all the detail on that. And then we'll talk about overcoming obstacles, and we'll have two more wonderful guests who we will talk to. Let me see from my checklist to make sure I say everything that is interesting that I want to say. So I've introduced myself. I'm Robbie. I'm one of the founders of StoryCube. I think whatever you do, whoever you are, whether you're an agency or a services business or a product manufacturer, or you're a solopreneur, or you're from a bigger outfit, or you're a charity or a social enterprise, or maybe you're kind of thinking of starting something slightly different. Today's about giving you some sort of candid information in a friendly way to help you be able to take steps forward and grow. So we've really focused on finding individuals who have practical things to say, and who have got the experience to be able to put things forward. And the structure is going to be very much me having a relaxed conversation with them to kind of draw some of that out and hopefully give you who are listening some food for thought and some things to take away with you. I'd like to just thank, before we go any further, our supporters. You'll hear from, as I said, the charity Hatch that we're supporting today in a moment, but we've been very fortunate to have both Maripay, who are going to be speaking from 11:45 a.m. Just after the second session this morning, who use technology as a dedicated assistant basically to collect payments and sort of help you with your cash flow so you can get paid earlier by customers. So if that's of interest, then that's no doubt rather exciting, and they think they've got a special offer for people to do a sort of audit on your finances. Absolutely all wonderful. So thank you so much to them for helping with some of this event. Also Score App and Founders Forum, who along with all of your good selves have helped to raise some money for Hatch Enterprise. And as I say, we'll hear from Dirk very, very shortly. Now, that's all good. Okay. I will say a brief bit of words about StoryCube, which has brought everyone together today, but not a huge amount, and we'll get stuck into
Robbie,
things.
Just to pause for a moment. I don't think your slides are changing.
I don't think I've changed them. That's why.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Just because
that's because I haven't changed them. I mean, it's a good shout, but it is me, not the technology. But there you go. You can see the wonderful supporters. You'll hear more from them in a minute. StoryCube, for those of you who aren't aware, is a framework basically that helps any organization explain what they do. And Michael and I devised this way too long ago now, 5-6 years ago, possibly, when we kind of came to this. And it came off the back of working with lots and lots of organizations and realizing that some of the basics of how you go about making sales, but also how you go about kind of the stuff that's on the slide, collaborating with others, pitching your business, whether that's for money or, again, for selling or partnerships or so on, motivating teams, attracting talent, and even just giving yourself the motivation to realize that what you're doing is of value. If you don't have that in place, then a lot of the other things you need to do to grow as a business are difficult. But an event like this came about because we realized that actually once you have those basics, there are sort of more detailed things that you need to take further and that you need to think about to go on. And StoryCube is called StoryCube because it asks 6 questions. They look like this. Oh, click on the right buttons. Basically, what problem do you solve? How do you solve it? What is your motivation? What sets you apart from other similar solutions? What are your differentiators? How do you connect with the right audience? And what obstacles could you see? And as you may have noticed, 4 of those subjects, basically, we're not doing problem solution because, well, if you haven't worked out the problem solution right now, I'd recommend you get off this call and go and have a think about what problem you solve and what solution you have to solve it. But in terms of those 4 other elements, motivations, obstacles, differentiators, and connecting with your audience, we thought we'd put together 4 specific sessions and just attack them really from different angles and have that conversation to bring them to life. So we've worked really hard to bring together an experienced, sort of interesting and say quite diverse group of people to talk to you. Some of them I know really well, like very well, and you'll hear about that as we go through. Some of them I've only met pulling together this event, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of conversation we have. And I don't think necessarily any of the panelists know each other particularly well either, so that will be good to get some of those ideas and share them up. And just as we go along, Michael will be in the chat in the whole of the session, so if you want to throw any questions in, I'll try and keep an eye on that as we go. We're not going to have formal Q&A, sort of stick your hand up and chat to the whole group in these panels, so we're trying to keep them quite tight. But if there are any questions that come up, I'll certainly be reviewing them and feeding them in. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a sort of reflection session, we've called it, to sort of a chance for a bit of open Q&A as well, if you want to join in that. Some final bits of housekeeping. Sessions will be recorded, as you know, because we had that faff at the beginning. We'll be here all day, so Michael and I will be sat here all day. Stuff's on basically, as you can see from the agenda, from now until about 12. Then there's another networking session if you want to join that, bit of a break for lunch, and then 2 till 4:30. But yeah, we'll be available in the chat, and I think you've had emails obviously to get this information to even join us. If you reply to those and you need to speak to Michael as well, we will pick it all up. As I say, it's meant to be relaxed, informative chats amongst friends, really. There should be some laughs, hopefully. I'll be laughing at myself anyway. It might be candid, but it should ultimately be about helping each other out. At which point, Dirk, I'm going to call you to the fore. I'm going to hand over to Dirk Berkhoff, who's the founder of Hatch Enterprise, which is a charity that helps underrepresented entrepreneurs. And Dirk, we'd love to hear a bit more about what you're doing and what we're supporting today.
Thanks so much, Robbie. Really appreciate it. And hi and welcome, everybody. Also, I don't need a slide. I can talk without slides.
I'm going to stop it the sharing. There you go.
Great.
Get your face in view.
And yeah, what Hatch has been doing for the last 9 years almost. We started in 2013. We've been supporting founders who by themselves believe that they are not as close to realizing their entrepreneurial ambitions because they might not have had access to money, access to the right skills, access to a mentor, access to a coach, access to a supportive network, etc. So what we've been building in the last 9 years is a really inclusive and holistic ecosystem of support that supports people from idea stage to start to grow. And that's taken us a long time, essentially, to do that. But everything also started with a story. And our story at the very beginning, when we had no business, or when I had no business, or no organization, was really the idea that entrepreneurship and building an organization, whether that's a for-profit or not-for-profit, should be there for everybody. Anybody should be able to build a business from their passion, their vocational background, their expertise, their access to networks. But I realized really early on that this wasn't the case. And a lot of people were essentially prevented from building a business for the various barriers that exist in entrepreneurship. So our story was, we want to change that. And how can we offer the same access to all these tools, networks, connections, and expertise by building a program that really serves founders as opposed to serving investors or serving other interests. Obviously now, after many years, we've been working with over 6,000 founders, and we know a bit or two about what it takes to support a founder into business. But yeah, on reflection, everything started with a story, and a story is one of the most powerful tools that you can use to really get out there and communicate your passion, communicate what you want to do and why you want to do it. You've probably heard all about Simon Sinek's, start with why. And that why, I think, really deserves a lot of attention, because that why will carry you through the up days and the down days. And keeping connected to your why and keeping connected to your story of why you want to start a business, run a business, grow a business, is going to be there all the time. It'll evolve and it'll change, but I think it's good to really understand why you want to do something. And yeah, we're really grateful for StoryCube to work with us. And we're really keen and excited to hear what the day is going to have in store for you. And, as always, we are also very, very happy to help any founder with their business. We've got a number of programs that are happening at any point in time in the year. And we're really excited to hear from you. If you do want to chat with us, we've got a number of ways to reach out to us. And super excited. And thanks, Robbie and Michael, for the opportunity to share our story and for the support you've been giving.
No problem at all. Thank you so much. I'm going to remove that spotlight, and I think it will come to me eventually. Thank you. Yeah, and we will hopefully people will get a chance to check things out. If you haven't donated, and we sort of the way we worked this, if you weren't clear, sort of give people access, but for those that can afford it to help support, we're really grateful for that, and we've been very, very happy to have collected a few £100 for you to go and do good things. So thank you so much, Derek. Now, Diana and Fiona, you're both here. That's good. There's a wave and there's a smile. What I'm going to do, I'm going to press some buttons here. Let's see how this works. Right, spotlight me. Then I'm going to add you to the spotlight. There we go. Then I'm going to add you to the spotlight. There we go. So we are about to kick off a session on motivations. You can both unmute. This is going to be a relaxed conversation. It's going to be good. You're in safe hands. Why are we talking about motivation? So motivations is, as I said, one of the sides of the story cube. And I think it's we talk about this a bit in more detail about being, whatever it is that gets you out of bed in the morning, what drives you forward. But broadly speaking, and Derek's obviously touched on this, the kind of the purpose at the heart of an organization can be quite a hot button subject, I think. But my take on it is that it can quite often be misunderstood. People feel very strongly that they need to be doing either something very worthy, maybe they don't need to be, or kind of not quite understanding how a purpose can fit neatly into their business. So today I want to chat about that a bit. And to do that, we've got Diana Carrion, who is, I've written in my notes here, is not a conflict of interest, but a harmonious interest, because Diana is my business partner. I am also one of the founders of Today Do This, but I'm not here under that banner this evening. Today, I'm here to grill Diana as hard as I will be grilling. I won't be grilling anyone at all. We'll be having a nice chat, and she'll tell us a bit more about what we do, what they do, and we've got Fiona as well, who is founder, editor-in-chief, and all-round overseer, I believe, at Ethos magazine, which is a great magazine that is specifically about businesses changing the world, and is about to go to print. I know, or have you put the issue to bed?
No, it's being proofed today and then it goes next week. So we're very nearly there. But as ever, there are a couple of little gaps and things that need fixing. So not far away, though. Fine.
It's always good to have some space to run into, I guess. But thank you for taking the time to join us, because I know things are very busy, and I know exactly what's on your agenda, Diana. So I know you're very busy too. And thank you again, both of you. So let's kick off, I guess, by sort of defining some terms. And, I've sort of stated, I guess, some point of view, but what is purpose in business, Dana? What do you think that means, and why is it useful, I guess?
I'm glad you started with that question, actually, because I think purpose has become one of those sort of buzzwords that seems to be appearing in everything from like self-help books to boardrooms. And because of that, I think it causes, quite a bit of either confusion, like, well, what does this actually really mean? All the way to kind of like a cynicism of thinking it's kind of a meaningless word entirely. And so I guess I think about it from kind of two perspectives, a personal perspective and a business perspective. And so to me, purpose in a sort of personal context, which does, drive me and what I'm trying to do professionally, means the difference that I personally am trying to make in the world. And similarly to that, my kind of definition of purpose in business is, what difference is this company trying to make in the world? And just sort of making a small number of people very rich is just not good enough anymore, I don't think. We're no longer in the age of robber barons. We know that the planet's resources are finite. And I think that a lot of us have come to realize that business success does actually depend on the well-being of employees and suppliers and customers and communities. So with that in mind, I think this idea of what difference are we trying to make in the world is a really helpful way for companies to think about purpose, sort of what is the genuine problem that we are trying to solve in a world that is filled with problems much bigger than, just as one example, like people's hair isn't shiny and bouncy enough, right? Like that's the so-called problem that almost every shampoo brand is trying to solve.
Lovely, shiny and bouncy today, as does yours.
Thank you. But even far more interesting and fulfilling, I think, is sure to do that while also, and more importantly, doing things like, to not mention any brand names, but you might recognize it, boosting people's confidence to improve their mental health, or reducing the amount of unnecessary water or plastic or synthetic chemicals that shampoo brands use, because those things are all relevant and important to the customer and to the world around that customer. And I'm not suggesting that every or even any brand go around trying to solve, all the problems of the world, because that is crazy and unrealistic, but that they do focus on solving a real and meaningful problem. And that's where I think that actually entrepreneurs are especially lucky, because those two definitions of purpose, the personal and the business, what difference am I trying to make in the world, and what difference is this business trying to make in the world, are much easier to reconcile when you're the one in charge.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, well, Fiona, have you got anything to add to that? But to sort of to throw in, because you've kind of touched on this maybe a little bit, businesses, do these purposes need to be worthy for the sake of it? I think you started to answer that question, but it'd be interesting to see your take from it, because obviously you're reading about being pitched to presumably all kinds of businesses all the time.
Yeah, funnily enough, I describe it in exactly the same way that Diana does. It's that difference that you're making in the world, and it's creating a positive impact. I think, businesses don't have to have a purpose. It's not completely necessary, because obviously it's something that goes beyond financial. But at the same time, I think, as Diana was sort of alluding to, businesses are really uniquely placed to be able to make a difference and to be able to challenge these problems that we have. Businesses are nimble and smaller than cities or states or whatever, or in some cases bigger. And actually, they're kind of, businesses cross boundaries and borders in a way that, other organizations don't and can't. So they have a massive role to play in all of this. But at the same time, I think too, as you say, businesses have to function for the benefit of people and communities and all that sort of thing. But actually, businesses can't grow and create impact without the planet. If they're destroying the planet, ultimately, that it's a massive business risk. So I think that whilst in the past, you would have been able to function without a purpose, increasingly, if you know what you're doing and why, going back to what Dirk was saying at the beginning, it helps you through the bad days and it helps you kind of get along. But also it's the thing ultimately that will, if you're not doing things for the right reasons, you will struggle, costs will increase, supply chains will become more temperamental and fragile. There's all sorts of things in terms of running a business that are threatened by that, and business can play a massive role in that. It's how you can best create impact.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that point about being uniquely placed, when compared to governments, when compared, obviously as individuals, we're small, but we can be mighty. But, the slow movingness of, civic life, public life, whatever you want to call it. I think that's a really interesting point that's maybe sometimes overlooked. And you've touched on there some of the business benefits that come from that. I mean, Dan, I know with Today Do This, we look at obviously how, things like how the employee, how the individual and talent and retention and stuff plays in as well. But are there other business benefits you think kind of come from just getting this sense of purpose, having it and embracing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess to preface a little bit, going back to your previous question around, do you need a worthy purpose? I mean, does a business need a worthy purpose to bag their Series A funding, or to make the CEO a millionaire or to have a high-profile IPO, the empirical evidence says no. But does a business need a worthy purpose to hire the best talent, to keep those people interested and committed to their work, to grow a loyal customer base that recommends the brand to their friends and family, and to ultimately stay in business for the long term in the 21st century? I'd say yes, and there's a lot of evidence to back that up. So there was a study a few years ago by the Center for Economic Studies that showed that employees who feel that they're working toward a good cause are 30% more productive, right? Productivity is something that is good for business. So that's one benefit that purpose can bring. There have been a couple more studies recently, both by one by the Journal of Management Studies and one by the Academy of Management, that kind of support that idea of employee motivation and productivity, saying that staff who don't feel that their work has meaning and purpose are less satisfied, less fulfilled, less engaged, less committed, and ultimately, less motivated to help the business, achieve success, and that makes them less productive, and also more likely to leave. And we all know losing talent is really expensive. That's kind of the employee side of business benefits. On the customer side, there's research that's been done annually for several years now by a research firm called Cohn and Porter Novelli. And that keeps showing every year that around 80% of people are more loyal to brands that lead with purpose. And also 80% of people said in that survey that they tell others to buy from those brands. So those are big numbers, and productive employees and loyal customers, those are important things. So yeah, having employees and customers that are willing to advocate for you as a business, that's a huge business benefit.
Yeah, it's really. I was thinking the other day about, I'm sure we've all heard the phrase "go woke, go broke," which is sort of a sense that investing lots of time and energy and money into progressive issues and so on is not good for business. But the thing that amuses me about it, as I was thinking, well, generally those businesses have a really clear purpose, though, right? The ones that are saying this have their own really clear purpose that is kind of trying to point in the opposite direction, trying to hold on to a different kind of world, and trying to fight for maybe non-progressive things. And you go, the principle that you're sort of about is saying that people who care about things will engage with things, and fundamentally the audience for caring about making the world better, not worse, is significantly bigger, and therefore it it's a sensible audience to kind of reach out to. And as you say, and just to hammer this home, because I think it's so critical, yes, that's true for making, and to everyone listening, yes, that's true for making sales, but it's also true for attracting talent. It's also true for attracting investment more and more. I think Dan and I had a conversation, and this is big scale stuff, but talking to people who are doing some research in things like the gas and oil industry, and they're just like, we can't get money because they need to see that we're doing something that's not terrible, we're doing something that's better, and that's from banks and so on. So even at those levels, I think it's interesting, and certainly that would be true for crowdfunders, for example, or things like that, which would become slightly smaller. So it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, Fiona, you see obviously a lot of different businesses. How do you think how do you identify the kind of stuff that Ethos covers, and what do you look for as the subjects that your audience are going to be interested in?
So, I mean, there's an amount of juggling in everything we do. We've got a really international audience, so we have to make sure that we have a good geographical balance and that stories come from all over the world, and we have to make sure that we have a balance sort of sectors and interests. So there is some sort of fundamental jigsaw pieces in place for that. But I think, from our point of view, it's the ability to demonstrate the positive impact that you're creating, because we get all sorts of things, and obviously there are some businesses that are really kind of savvy around their PR and that sort of thing, and say, this is what we want to do, this is what we're aiming to do. But generally speaking, we try and avoid startups or new startups. There has to be a kind of track record that goes beyond, this is just what we want to do, and actually says, this is what we've done, this is what we've achieved, and this is the difference that we're making in the world. So that's something that's really fundamental to us. I think the other thing as well is, a sense that businesses completely understand their purpose, and it's utterly aligned with not only their activity but their culture, their business culture. Because we do hear things about, sort of, I think there can still be some murkiness around sort of philanthropy and charity and how that fits in with the business. We'll get people coming to us saying, well, we gave X amount of money to charity last year, and that isn't purpose to us. I think it has to be something that's not a bolt-on, and it's something that runs through the business like a seam. It's completely aligned with sort of every activity, the way all of the team members work together and behave, and that internal culture too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, and that gets to maybe the next point I want to move on to, which is credibility, right? If when you look at what it is people choose to do, and there's nothing wrong with giving lots of money to charity, right? That's better to do that than to do something else, but it doesn't answer the deeper questions of credibility that come into it. And I think to shuffle this conversation more towards some of the practical stuff, and I'll ask you in a moment to, I guess, Diana specifically, to explain a bit more about what Today Do This and how it works in practice. But for both of you, really, how do you think you go about finding that credible purpose? I mean, Fiona, just to tail off that conversation, is this things that you see as green flags and red flags, I guess, for where it is credibility? I mean, maybe you've covered that already in the culture, but are there interesting things you've noted over the years?
There are, but at the same time, I do think that, businesses kind of can change and evolve, and they will, and there is a process. So I think, while you often see sort of businesses, particularly now, that are started with, I say particularly now, obviously look at Patagonia and Patagonia's news from yesterday, and the fact that this company that's valued at 3 billion is just turning all of that money over to the environment. So this is not necessarily something new, but I do think it's more likely that businesses that are started now have purpose kind of baked into them. But at the same time, other businesses can evolve and change, and I think from our point of view, it's also a question of progress. It's a difficult thing to do. There's lots of different competing priorities within a business, and it's the constant journey of kind of evolution and progress, I think. So that is something that we look for. And although there are things that are red flags, I think it's a question of seeing, how businesses might be moving on from something, what they're doing next, what they've learned from that. This is a whole process of, I think it's a different attitude towards businesses in the UK to the US in terms of how businesses fail and survive and what they go on to do and how you learn from that. So I certainly wouldn't want anybody to think that, you've got to be kind of perfect from the off and have all of this stuff figured out, because it is something that goes on. But I think, when we talk to businesses about purpose, and, there are some that come and say, they're very clear about, this is what I wanted to do, and I know that I want to do it, and they have that within them from the start. If you're kind of almost reverse engineering it, and I think it's a strategic point often, purpose, it's something that really kind of helps focus and move direction. And a lot of businesses that maybe have been around for a little bit longer won't necessarily understand what their purpose is. But I think there's a process towards understanding that and breaking things down into, so what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? So that you can really refine the essence of what you do and articulate that very clearly. And then I think that's a good way to kind of steer the ship as well, for you to sort of break it down from, well, we sort of did a bit of that and that and that and that, which I think is where you can have a bit of a credibility issue when you do lots of things. And if you hone that purpose by thinking about what you've done, what's worked, what your impact has been, what your customers respond to and what potential investors respond to too. It's a really useful tool to focus, as well as something that you can start off with and build a business around.
Absolutely. And I think great point about this, of the organic nature of it, and the belief that, you don't, it's not an all or nothing thing. People are forgiving. I think that's a fair point as well. Again, for people listening, it's about, I don't know why this anecdote's come to my mind, but my mother killed a squirrel on her driving test, and it's a true story. But she still passed that driving test because of the way she dealt with the squirrel being taken forward. And my point of that short anecdote is, people are forgiving, I think, to look at what you do. What do you do in response to these things? You can make mistakes. You can have a history that is not positive, but it's what are you doing to go forward? And that doesn't mean you have to be Patagonia. And by the way, if anyone is doesn't know the news from Patagonia, Michael's put a link into the chat to a news story yesterday. The owner signed over, I think 3 billion, I think you said, of value basically to be protected, to look after the planet. So really interesting stuff. But it's about moving forward. Now, on that note, Dan, it'd be great to hear a bit more about kind of how Today Do This approaches that, you know, and answering some of these questions and on a practical basis.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked the question, like how does a company find a credible purpose? Because I feel like a lot of the conversations around this issue tend to get stuck with like the why. Why is this important? And you know, as we should have, we talked about that a little bit at the beginning. But the how bit is something that I think kind of rarely gets answered, and you need that in order to be able to do this stuff in a credible way. And to just pick up on that point that Fiona made, you know, a credible purpose, I think in a business can be baked in from the beginning, or it can be something that you sort of tap into as the business evolves. And at Today Do This, we have like a really clear 3-step kind of framework that we use to answer this question of how do you find a credible purpose. And it works, I think, both on a personal level and also on a company level. And it basically boils down to 3 questions. So question number 1, what are your strengths? Your, you know, either your talents individually or your core competencies as a business. What are you good at? So that's question number 1. Number 2, what is a genuine problem in the world that you would like to solve? So again, either on a personal basis or at a business level, you know, is it climate change that is most kind of salient and relevant to you? Or is it social inequality? Or is it environmental degradation? Or is it the mental health crisis? Or is it something else? So it's the second question, what's the problem you want to solve? And then the third question kind of brings those 2 things together, the strengths and your problem that you're trying to solve, into, you know, how can you solve the biggest problem you can using your greatest strength? And I think that's kind of where you start to find your purpose. And then the really important thing is, you know, figuring out how you deliver that across every aspect of the business, right? And doing that with credibility and integrity by thinking about how that impacts your products and services, or, you know, your processes, whether that's, you know, how you make or deliver or source your products. How does that impact in terms of your people? What does that mean, you know, as Fiona said, in terms of your culture? And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you wanted me to talk a little bit more, Robbie, about kind of actually, you know, how does that work? How do you actually start to activate?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting, you know, I mean, maybe in the context of one of our clients, you know, sort of what does that look like in terms of going through? And I mean, I guess the interesting thing from today's point of view, so Today Do This works with corporate clients, right? You know, basically sort of big organizations doing things. But I think the reality of I mean, I said I wouldn't speak to this, but it's hard when it's my own company as well. But it is, you know, taking individuals and showing them that they have the power to make a real difference. So yeah, it would be interesting to hear, I guess, sort of, well, anecdotally, literally, but I guess in practice, what that looks like in an organization. And it can work in an organization of any size, right? The stuff you've just talked about.
Yeah. So I can give some examples and kind of talk a little bit, I guess, about the journey that we take companies through as well. So we start by making sure that a company has a strong purpose, a sense of what difference they're trying to make, and how they might go about doing that as a business. So basically, a strategy, like, do they have some sort of a strategy for delivering their purpose? And then we go kind of straight to employees all across the business with that, to make sure that they each understand that purpose. They understand the strategy for how the company is trying to achieve it. And most of all, and more importantly, they understand how that is personally relevant to them as an employee of that company. But really crucially, we don't do that by telling them how it's relevant to them, right? That's the usual top-down approach of like, a few people in a dark room have gone and like thought up this purpose and created some PowerPoint slides, and now we're going to come out to the business and you know, show off our fancy deck, and the end. You've been engaged. So rather than sort of telling people how the company's purpose is relevant to them, we ask them, because they know the business, and in particular their area of the business best, right? Not us, not any consultant, not you know, even the CSR team or the CEO, right? Every employee was hired because they were the best person for that job, and they do it day in and day out. So we ask them a version of those three questions that I brought up before, sort of what are your strengths, your responsibilities, your areas of influence involved in your work, what part of the company's purpose or impact strategy are you personally most interested in? And then how can you use your strengths and influence to help the company achieve that purpose or deliver on its impact strategy? And then we do two really important things, without which I think all of this stuff is likely to be just another disappointing kind of employee engagement exercise, talking shop. So first, we get them to pick just one of those ideas that might have come up with to start working on. Often times the reason why we don't take action on things is because there are so many things that we could do that we get a little bit overwhelmed with the choice, and so we decide to do nothing. So we get them to pick just one idea. And to give you some examples of what that's looked like with some of our client businesses, that might be a finance manager that decides to make the business case for a net zero climate target, or a procurement director that decides to prioritize local and minority-owned businesses, or a customer service rep that decides they want to start trying out some more inclusive communication methods, or even one of my favorites, a sort of admin assistant who's in charge of ordering like the, you know, lunches and refreshments and things for meetings, who decided that she was going to start sourcing only vegetarian and vegan food for meetings because that has a better impact on the climate. And then basically we take those individuals through a whole series of steps to get them actually starting to do that thing that they have committed to doing. So we have 6 initial steps that we take them through, inspired by Martin Luther King, 6 steps of social change, and informed by a whole bunch of behavioral science that we've thrown into that, which help people go from kind of good ideas and good intentions to actual practical, tangible action. And then once they've started doing that, which it is impossible not to do unless they simply refuse to participate, is that we help them keep going by sort of providing some tools and resources over a few months to help them overcome some of the biggest challenges of creating change in the workplace, because, you know, those challenges inevitably always arise, the lack of time or confidence or budget or a network. And so that's where we bring in kind of the tools of organizational behavior and change management to make sure that all of these, you know, lofty purposes and then interesting, innovative ideas actually get done, because that's where the real credibility is and how the real impacts can be made.
I think, yeah, that's great. And that's that full circle, right? It's kind of, you know, we all see the headlines, we all see the adverts, you know, with someone standing on top of a mountain and a dove flying ass peace. That's the wrong imagery. I don't know, a polar bear wandering by, and everything being green and happy, or, you know, the black square that's put up after, you know, around BLM or whatever it might be. And that's that kind of take, but actually it's that full circle in all encompassing piece that starts to get real. And I love those examples you've shared, because obviously something as simple as the snacks that you bring into a meeting can be imbued with your purpose, and you can choose to make, you know, better choices over what you do. And I think for everyone listening, even if you're a solopreneur, right, which supplier you use for your, I don't know, paper that you put in your printer because you need to still send things out to people or whatever, or, you know, where you choose to have meetings, who you choose to advertise with, all of those different things are choices that we can make as individual organizations, as well as obviously much bigger, and it just multiplies more and more and more. And I think so it's a really interesting take to take out. Take it in a sort of different direction. I'm really interested by something. I've scribbled something down here in something that you both have touched on. Actually, no, you haven't touched on it, Diana, but it is inherent to who you are. So you talked about the international flavor of Ethos, which I think is really interesting in terms of obviously, I say obviously you're based in Liverpool, right? And the magazine's based in Liverpool. We're really happy today actually to have people from all over the UK and beyond, which is nice as well. It's not London centric today, people. It's all happening. But Dana, you're obviously not a Brit by birth, right? I know you are Venezuelan via USA in the UK now for 20 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's
Something
right.
like that. So I'm really interested in kind of, I think as much as everyone comes from a different perspective, probably in the issues that they care about, the backgrounds that they have, and that's going to, I'm just talking about internationalization because it's a nice change of pace. Do you think that there are any obvious differences that come up in terms of, the industries people are in, who they are, and stuff this works better for? Or are there countries that are doing this better? Are there industries that are doing this better? Are there types of people with different backgrounds who started businesses that are doing this better? Or not? Maybe not. But I don't know, Fiona, again, you see so much stuff that passes your pages. I know maybe there's something that's coming in the current issue that speaks to that, or I don't know. Just that was an interesting angle.
I mean, it's really varied. I think one of the big issues and one of the considerations that you always have to think about, particularly when you talk about things around kind of climate change and stuff, is the difference between the global north and the global south in terms of, what people in the global north have been able to achieve largely, standard of living and that sort of thing, and sort of taking away something from people who kind of aspire to that better off lifestyle, to like driving a car or owning 2 cars or whatever it is. It's a really, really complicated conversation about privilege and who can say what. Ultimately, with that sort of thing, it's always the people who have least who will suffer most and first. Particularly around climate, if you look at Pakistan at the moment, and 1/3 of the country is underwater. So I think you see a lot of things, that are really kind of grassroots in across the world, where people are suffering because of climate change, whether it's wildfires or droughts or flooding or whatever it might be. So at a really localized level, how people can do that, and Diana talking there about kind of the power of the individual, and you are seeing that. I think there's also a lot of kind of assumptions and biases. So I know, people talk a lot about China and industrialization in China and the environment and smog and all those sorts of things. But actually, China as an economy is also really rapidly kind of modernizing lots of its factories. There's an awful lot of work that's happening around climate change and solar power and that sort of thing. So I think, we have to be really wary of a lot of kind of inherent biases that are sort of within the system. But it's, what did you say? Who's better at it, or where is better? I mean, I think, sort of established economies are conscious of it because you can see the impact. But at the same time, then you've got all of those years of precedent to shift. So there's no magic way of doing it. I know, obviously, during COVID, people sort of talked about how pollution was reducing because we were all doing less and going out less, and less was being produced. It also showed us the frailty of sort of global supply chains. And, if you've got things coming from, Brexit is showing us that in the UK at the moment, it's where things come from and how long it takes to get there. So I think, there's a move towards localism around that, but also these things have impact. That has impact on costs, it has impact on employment, it has impact on communities. So there isn't I don't think there is an ideal way for doing this, because I think sometimes the countries that think, right, we've got to do this because we've had 50 years of burning lots of fossil fuels and roaring around in a Mercedes or a BMW, they've got to shift a lot of thinking, and then people think that they're losing out. Whereas younger economies can be really nimble on this. Emerging economies can produce things, but also kind of change the status quo more quickly. So I don't think anybody has the moral high ground on it, particularly at the moment. But I think we need to take a lot of those assumptions into account, when you're talking about what happens where and why.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fascinating. And I think it's a really good illustration you've laid down there of the the nuance that's of course there, of the interconnectivity of everything, which of course is the reason that we need to improve things everywhere, right? It's because of that interconnectivity in and of itself. And I suppose the danger of trying to be too simplistic about anything, of saying that, well, we're not going to do X because that's just fundamentally bad. But it's like, well, actually, it's about trying to understand how your role, and I guess, harking back to the sort of practical points you've been making, Dana, how your individual role can play a positive, can move things forward positively, and trying to understand how your skills and the issues you want to change, and actually understanding it, not just, well, someone's told me somewhere that if I do this thing, maybe it's going to be better. It's going, no, you take the responsibility, you look at, you start to take that energy and move it forward. And again, to reiterate, I guess, for the audience, it's anyone can do that. You just have to be willing and to take the time and read Ethos magazine, obviously, to get as much information as possible, and so on and so forth. I mean, Dana, have you got anything to add on that conversation?
On the international kind of
well, anything you're inspired to talk about.
I mean, I guess I can highlight a couple of things that I've run into that have struck me over time. So I remember seeing a few years ago some research that had come out around attitudes toward things like the environment and sustainability across different parts of the world. And I think at the time, if you'd sort of asked, like, what do developing countries think about this stuff? What do the Chinese think about this stuff? Because there had been so much conversation around, and there still is, all of the industrialized nations, they're the ones that have, grown rich more quickly. And so now they're talking about this stuff, and, we shouldn't be expecting developing countries to care at all about the climate, for example. And that research showed something completely different. It said, people in developing countries, people in China, they do care deeply about the environment, about a world where people work collaboratively to make things better. And I thought that was one really interesting thing that struck me a while ago. And then just yesterday, in fact, I was listening to I think it might have been the Daily podcast, where they were talking about the new law in California that from 2035, I think it is, you'll no longer be able to buy a new car that has an internal combustion engine. And they were sort of talking about how this change over time has come about. And one of the things that they mentioned, which I think is the first time I have heard a kind of like mainstream media source bring out this kind of evidence, which is that it's the reason why so many car companies now are introducing electric vehicles is because of consumer demand. And it's partly, that some of that consumer demand is driven by competition in the automotive industry, right? So somebody came in, the early movers, Tesla and Toyota with the Prius and whatnot, and said, this is something that we think, we can make a proper, successful, business decision out of. And that got, customers starting to say, oh, actually, here's, this piece of kit that's, it's a sexy car. It's a car that goes fast. It's a car that will get me to where I need to go. And, it's becoming more of a computer than a car. And that kind of, I guess, like virtuous circle of, having businesses that lead the way and can show customers that, hey, there's something here that is desirable. And then those customers demanding more of that, that's what starts to kind of move industries more and more quickly and make it all part of a bigger conversation. But in terms of, are there countries or industries or companies that do this better or worse? I think that with the right sort of understanding and guidance, it's possible for any company or any individual to make a more positive impact than what they're making now.
It's really interesting the way you lay that out, talking about, Tesla, the automotive industry and demand. And if you replace that with anything throughout history, on a business course or whatever, you talked about saying, oh, well, we introduced a new product, we created a market for it, and because we're the market, we're the leader in that market, and we're going to grow that, and we're going to make more money. That's really basic stuff, right? And this is we call this the growth series, because of course we want people to be able to achieve more success and grow what they do. And the idea, the baffling idea that, because to put it a different way, if this stuff didn't work, if no one wanted it, it wasn't useful and so on and so forth, well, yes, of course, it's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to change the world by introducing a product nobody wants that doesn't do a good job. That's madness. That's not a way to approach anything. But I think the way you just laid that out is really sort of easy to follow and sort of goes, oh yeah, okay, that's kind of obvious. And it is changing. And I think it probably gets even more nuanced on whether or not, of course, it's forcing people to buy new vehicles they wouldn't buy otherwise, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It goes back to Fiona's point of the difficulties being wrangled with. I've got a 12-year-old Honda on the drive, and you go, yeah, it'd be nice to have an electric car, but I'm not going to buy a new car for the sake of it. We'll upgrade it when it needs to be upgraded. But I think the movement shows that activity, it bleeds into the public consciousness, and when it works, it can make huge change. And I guess things like green energy would be a similar thing. People demanding that in terms of their purchases. Very interesting stuff. I asked you both. I mean, I hope you did it now. It's gonna be embarrassing for everyone. If you had any practical tips in terms of kind of what people can do to sort of use purpose to grow their business. I mean, I know you have one, Diana, because I asked you yesterday. So I'll start with you, and then Fiona, you can sort of obfuscate if you decide that you haven't got a practical tip.
Yeah, I've got a really quick one. I'm conscious that I've had a couple of long-winded answers, but actually I have one practical tip for the way that people can use purpose to grow their business, and I have another practical tip that has nothing to do with that entirely, but does have to do with the topic that we've been discussing. So don't forget to come back to that one. Okay. But yeah, I guess my biggest tip is to motivate your team by getting them involved in generating, ideally, or at the very least, sort of refining what your organization's purpose is. And then most importantly, helping to deliver that purpose through the responsibilities and decisions that those people make in their everyday work. And that's what we do at Today Do This. So if you need help with that, I'll put my email address and LinkedIn into the chat, and do feel free to get in touch. I suppose I'd be remiss, Robbie would be upset if I did not mention the fact that we have an amazing newsletter that has been named one of the top 50 newsletters in the world, because it's a weekly newsletter that comes out every Friday, looking at one of the headlines from that week's news. Sometimes it's depressing news, not always. And often. Basically, let's say 75% of the time or more. And yeah, so it takes an item from the news and it tells you one very simple thing that you can do to help make that issue better. And it's covered everything from, the obvious things like climate change and inequality and improving your community, all the way to, I believe, tomorrow's is about grief. Given the well, I mean, I've sent you a version of it to review, so I hope you believe. Hopefully, you've read it. Oh, Laura, I see that you put in the chat. Where do you sign up for the newsletter? I'll put that link in the chat as well. What a question! Brilliant. Fiona, any practical thoughts for the assembled congregation?
I think two things which are completely interrelated. One is to articulate it internally and externally, so that all of your team focus on it and you communicate that as part of your story. You tell people why it's important to you so that they understand you as a business, and then just use it strategically, use it to direct and focus all of your activity, because I think it connects you to like-minded people and you will become known in that environment. And I think, it's also a really it's a supportive community environment. When other businesses can see that you are driven by purpose and purpose-led, they kind of champion you and support you too. So I think, I say, use it as a focus. So use it to kind of get rid of anything that doesn't help you make that difference in the world. But make that really obvious, both in terms of your work, but in terms of the way that you talk about it too, and how you communicate it internally and externally.
Yeah, fantastic. And you know, that idea, I think of it as a filter is absolutely critical. You know, we've touched on this sort of in different ways throughout this conversation, but you know, I think my key takeaway when I'm advising businesses, I do, you know, through these kind of sessions and other things, is sort of to say, it's like it's straight for anything. If you're going to have a thing, make sure you're using that thing. And if you're finding it difficult to use that thing, maybe it's the wrong thing and you need to go back and sort of look at what it is. But then don't fall out. I mean, that, you know, and that starts with, I'm always reminded of the example I always go to is like, if you tell people that your business saves people time, like that's what it does, that you've got a piece of software or you've got a service that does that, like if your onboarding takes 3 days and you need to fill in 19 forms to do it, you're failing, right? That should be pretty obvious. But similarly, you know, if you're telling people that you know, you exist in order to, you know, decrease the footprint of you know, for people on the world with their cosmetics or whatever it might be, it's like, okay, cool, but that might be true, but what are you doing at every stage? And as I say, I think anyone can take that on and anyone can do that. So it's very exciting. Fiona, where do people get Ethos Magazine?
ethos-magazine.com. I'll put it in the chat too.
It's a lovely looking magazine.
Thanks. Yeah, we and we're looking forward to having some Today Do This content in the next one. Obviously, you know, as we've talked about today, you guys are, oh, there we go, are really good on, we do this thing called small changes, which Today Do This is particularly good at, because I think, you know, as everybody said today, there's one thing trying to tackle all of these big, enormous issues up here in the world. And then there's another thing going, what's the first step? What's the simplest, easiest thing I can do to kind of get me moving in that direction? So yeah, we like it when we can bring in some of your work on that too.
On which note, pick me. Can I give my final practical tip?
Go on, that was going to be the last bit.
So yes, because I never do talks without giving the audience something to do. And because Robbie mentioned my shiny bouncy hair earlier, I was going to say that that one very small thing that any of you can do to improve your environmental impact a little bit at home is I've switched to using bar shampoo and bar conditioner, which uses just so much less water than regular shampoos and conditioners that come in plastic bottles, have a ton of unnecessary water in them, weigh a whole bunch more, and therefore cost more and have more of a climate impact to transport. So that's my little practical action. Look for bar shampoo and conditioner. It's good. Give you
there you go. The tip. I just stopped washing about 2 years ago. That was my approach to it. It's a nightmare in this household. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And we are going to move on to obstacles. I'm going to do some clicks and buttons. And what I'll say to finalize is in the chat, there's some links there. If you're interested in any of the stuff that's been discussed, you can pick it up. But I can see that we have Manish and we have Alice here to join our next session, which is working perfectly so far today. So this is great. I am going to now remove your spotlight, add, oh no, now I can't see where anyone is. Oh, here we go. Add your spotlight, and then where if you go, there you are. Add your spotlight. Fantastic. Motivation, I think everything we've talked about there is really interesting because it throws up a lot of negativity, right? It throws, you kind of think there's these things that have to be dealt with in the world, and they are fundamentally obstacles. And that's the session that we're going to move on to now. And obstacles is one of the sides of the story cube, because it sits in a space that isn't so much about kind of the story you tell per se. It's not about saying, you know, oh, we're going to tell you all the tricky bits we've got to deal with in business, but it's about acknowledging very, very specifically and very clearly that when you have a challenge, you need to embrace that. You need to make that part of who you are and what you do, because that's the only way you're going to get past it, but B, hopefully turn it into an opportunity. And I think we've got some very interesting things to hear from our guests today, who are, we've got Manish Kapoor, who is a creative agency growth consultant. Is that a good conversation? Good take. Has a long and storied history in design agencies, I believe mainly, but you can tell us a bit more about what you do in your background in a second. And Alice Stevenson, founder of Stevenson Law, who is, I think, you know, goes through life being a non-obvious legal professional. Is that a fair take? And all the better for it, I say, Alice, but I'm sure you've got plenty of stories to tell on the way through. I mean, just as a sort of additional point, you know, why this subject and maybe some of the topics we're going to get into. Look, I think for everyone listening on the call today, you come to these sessions because there are things that you sort of think, oh my God, there's things I've got to deal with. And whether that's money or recruitment or naysayers, competitors or whatever it might be, hopefully we can explore some interesting conversation topics now for the next sort of 45 minutes on how to get through that. There you go. Let's kick off with you, Alice. Why don't you tell us your background, what you do, and yeah, you can, well, take that in any way you wish to. But yeah, great to hear a bit about you and Stevenson Law and how it came to be.
Yeah, okay. So I started my career in HR, actually. So I started working in human resources, mostly in the NHS, actually. It was quite interesting, doing lots of performance management, disciplinaries, grievances, all of that. And then pivoted my career into law. Went back to uni, did my law conversion course and the legal practice course, which you have to do to qualify as a solicitor. Got a training contract. So solicitor, you have to train for 2 years before you're qualified in practice. So I got a training contract with a big regional commercial law firm. And then worked for about 3 years as a corporate commercial technology lawyer. So I was always quite sort of broad in my practice. And when I got to 3 years qualified, I'd absolutely had enough of working in private practice. It was so misogynistic. I entered the profession as a working mum, and just constantly having to deal with comments about calling me a part-timer because I had to leave at 5:30 to pick up my children or whatever it was, just lots and lots of negative comments about the fact that I was a mom, and just the sexism and the misogyny within the workplace was just horrendous. So when I was 3 years qualified, I just quit. And I didn't have anything to go to. I was just like, this is not what I want to do at all. But I couldn't think of anything else to do. So I started working as a freelance lawyer. And I'd ended up doing that for about 3 years, actually. And then I decided that I was going to start my own law firm. And that's when Stevenson Law was founded 5 years ago. So I started it on my own. I didn't have a co-founder at the time. I didn't know anyone else who had started a law firm. Everybody around me basically told me that I was mentally bananas for wanting to start a law firm. But I was determined to do it anyway. And I really wanted to build a law firm that was going to be a law firm that I would have been happy working in when I was working in private practice. So really trying to make somewhere that's much more inclusive, that's much more accepting of people's differences. I always had to cover up my tattoos when I was working. And even if, somebody caught a glimpse of one of my tattoos through a blouse that I was wearing, I'd get some kind of sort of sarky comment about it. So I always felt that I was never really accepted for who I was. And I really wanted to make a law firm that really turned that on its head and really accepted people for who they are. And now we've been running for 5 years. I am no longer practicing law, so I gave up doing legal work a couple of years ago. I've got a team of 40 people, and we really specialize in working with fast growth businesses, advising them on a number of things. So we do technology, data protection, intellectual property, corporate employment. We're not a full service law firm. There's quite a few things that we don't do. But we provide the kind of fundamental legal support that most businesses need day to day. And we've got a really good network of specialists that we can pull in when we need to as well. And we're quite purpose driven. Our purpose is very much about empowering our lawyers to challenge the status quo of the industry. So we talk a lot about lawyers being real people, human lawyers, and trying to really break down those barriers that exist between law firms and businesses who need legal support. Yeah,
that's really interesting. And I mean, obviously I'm sure we'll get into some more detail on it, but you've already touched on the obstacles you've had to battle just because of who you are fundamentally. But obviously, as a founder of an organization, everyone will recognize there's that treadmill, right, day to day, of just things that come up that are pragmatic that you need to go to too. And what was interesting, I think, in inviting you to do this is, of course, and the same for Manish, we'll hear from you in a second, sir. You are helping people to deal with their own obstacles. So I'm sure we'll come at this stuff from many angles as we go through. But yeah, let's hear a bit more about your world, Manish, and what you do and how you got there.
Right, thanks, Robbie. Well, I always struggled in school. Academically, it was always quite challenging for me. There's only one subject that I was half good at, which was art. And for me, I grew up in very much around the hip hop culture, graffiti, hip hop, breakdance. I was quite a good breakdancer myself, actually. Can't do any of it now. I can get down.
Right. I thought we might
see get down. I can't get back up. But that was my thing. And so the love of art and trying to find a career in that, it was challenging because there was a certain stereotype and I suppose ambition from my family to follow certain types of roles that maybe they feel that Indian kids on the whole should try and follow, which is obviously law, accountancy, or some kind of engineering. And I didn't really follow that track. So it was quite difficult for my parents to kind of accept that I wanted to do something different. But thankfully, they realized that, that wasn't where my passion would ever be. I'd always struggle. So they allowed me to do what I wanted to do. And so I left school age of 16, did a 1-year foundation course in print. And that was advised to me by my advisor. He said, look, end of the day, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a graphic designer and I want to design record sleeves. And he said, yeah, you and everybody else. And he said, look, there's this course that started up local to you, does print, will give you a slight head start, a bit more of a practical course. Why don't you give that a go? And then you can go on and do the traditional degrees and things like that into graphic design. And so I did that for a year. But at that time, apprenticeships were still there. And I got an opportunity to work for a company quite early on. So I started work at the age of 17 as a junior designer. But it wasn't long until I realized that compared to my peers, I wasn't that great. I was good, but I was never going to be the best designer. And I never wanted to be mediocre. And so I realized where my talents lied was actually managing creatives. And they're an interesting bunch. And so trying to get the best out of them, giving them the right kind of environment, managing their workloads. So my kind of path went more into like studio management. And that kind of transitioned into operations. And I worked for a number of large design agencies. I joined one agency that was probably one of the biggest at the time. And they had 3 offices at that point, which was in London, Amsterdam, and they just opened Singapore. And my role grew with them. I was there for 15 years and they grew from around about 70 people to over 500. My role was to organize the internal operational structure so that they could actually grow and be profitable. Eventually it was sold to WPP in 2017. But my role was primarily to make sure that anybody could travel to any of the offices. So by the time they sold to WPP, they had offices in London, Amsterdam, Singapore, New York, and Shanghai. But you could go to any one of those studios and you could just start working literally in the space of 2 hours, because all the systems, the processes, the ways of working were the same. It didn't mean that they didn't have their own nuances. They took into the sort of the regional kind of ways of working, but it allowed everyone to just get started. And it really felt like a family. And so people could go to any of the offices, settle in quite quickly and understand the, sort of the Design Bridge ways, which is the agency I work with. But it did get to a point where I thought, what next? They'd gone to over 500 people. WPP had taken them over. And I thought, where am I going to go from here? And I always wanted to do my own thing. I was just trying to find the opportunity of what that might be. And so I decided to take the plunge and become an independent consultant. And I suppose we'll talk about this when we talk about obstacles. And I kind of took the route that initially wasn't right. And it took a couple of years to reframe what I wanted to be doing and have confidence in my abilities. And so I would say probably for the last year is where it's really started to work out, where I've defined what I'm about, the market that I serve, the services I actually offer. But as we talk about the obstacles that other people have faced, I'll probably talk a bit more about what I also went through, which got me where I am today, which is in a much, much better position.
Oh, wow, tantalizing. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah, it's really, really, really interesting. And what I'm struck by, and I hope everyone listening is too, is that you've both laid out there a kind of, a broad overview of how you've got to where you are today, which is hugely successful individuals, operating, I believe, in a place where you're happier with where you are and doing things that, you're doing it the way you want to do it. But you both started, as you both put it, from scratch, right? You set out into a world that said, you can, I know that's what I'm hearing from both of you, you can't do this thing, or this thing's going to be so difficult you shouldn't bother, or expectations put on you, whether that's as a mother or as you say, as an Indian kid, and what that community around you or the individuals around you, or indeed people that don't even know you, have to say, which is half the battle with things. And I think really interesting and inspiring to hear that sort of sense of going and working way through. But I also like the fact you're acknowledging so clearly it is hard, right? It is difficult to take on these things. And so what I guess I want to get into is both what challenge, some specific challenges I guess you faced, and how you kind of managed to go through them. So going back to you, Alice, I mean, you talked about the misogyny that was right early on, but I guess when you started your business, what were the things that maybe you were surprised by that were difficult, or maybe you weren't surprised? I mean, that's probably the lot of women as much as anything, unfortunately. But what were you surprised and not surprised by was difficult, and did you find ways to cope with that, or are you still battling through in some ways?
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges I had, so I guess as a lawyer, I was still relatively junior when I started my law firm. I was 6 years qualified, which in the legal world is sort of mid-level, really. You're not considered to be a senior lawyer at that point. So I think one of the biggest challenges I had was actually getting people to take me seriously. And I think that was partly because I didn't have sort of decades of experience behind me. It was partly because I'm a woman, and it's partly because I look the way that I look. I guess that was something that I was just always quite conscious of, and I felt like I was having to overcompensate for it in lots of different ways. So, I probably, when it came to sales with clients, I had to focus a lot more on giving practical examples of why I could do what I could do, giving much more evidence to back up my credibility, because I didn't have that just on the surface. And then I think, as things developed and as the business grew and as our client list grew and all of those things happened, then I think my credibility has less and less come into question now. But it's just, it definitely started me off on the back foot, I think.
Yeah, but then that's interesting that you highlight, the pragmatism that needs to come out in that, because I think sometimes what's interesting with any obstacles that we face is that you're forced, right? When life's really easy, and these things are going along, and maybe success is coming, and this may be, maybe true for some of you listening, and maybe true sometimes, not true other times. You kind of don't analyze, I guess, what it is that you need to get to that next step. So great. I mean, that example of going, okay, so we're going to get pragmatic examples. I'm going to show you literally that I have done A and achieved B, and you cannot argue with that, whatever your prejudices are, whatever your biases are, whatever your expectations are that come through. From your point of view, Manish, what were the things that you said you took a misstep, I suppose, when you started as a consultant? What was that?
My misstep was thinking that I could solve business problems for every type of business in all areas. So I sort of took the leap as becoming a business coach, because I thought that was quite a unique role, which clearly I know now is far from the case. And so I thought I could go into the market with not very little sales experience, because my job was very much back office, as it were, to try and sell myself as a business coach, where I could go into any business and help them to scale and grow. And the reality was I just didn't actually have the credibility, unlike Alice, who sort of built that over a period of time. I was very new to the market, and people were like, well, how can you help our business? And so I realized that actually, it was a hard sell, because people didn't see I had the credibility, didn't have the case studies. I didn't truly understand their businesses. And so the best thing for me was to niche down and to be brave enough to do that, and accept that I might miss out on some opportunities. But actually, it was about being a lot more focused, look at my own positioning to see where I could add most value, and really sort of commit to that and stick with it. And yes, there was periods where you thought, okay, have I been a little bit too narrow in my focus? Should I be more broader? But in fact, I went further. I went from saying, okay, I'm going to only focus on creative agencies, because that's the businesses I understand most. And I'm not even going to help in areas that other people could help better on, like for instance, like business development. I'm going to focus on maximizing their profitability from an internal perspective and help them with their operations. So now I operate as a consultant with helping creative agencies with their internal operations. But that's taken a period of over 3 years. And so it was a difficult move because, you know, I wanted to be quite broad. I thought there'd be like loads of opportunities if I went in there as a general business coach. Realized quite early on that actually you need to have credibility and you need to go out into the market with some kind of credentials, and you're better off just sticking to what you know best, where you know you can genuinely add value. And one of the biggest obstacles is, you know, consultants on the whole get a bit of a bad rep because there's good and bad, as there are with all types of jobs and careers and businesses. And when people get burnt, they are very reluctant to go back. And I didn't realize the amount of objections I would get before I even spoke to them, just going in there with the term consultant. So trying to go in there with someone who's being quite generalistic, I didn't really stand a chance. So going in there with a very particular niche where I did have some credibility, could give some case studies, is where things start to pick up. But it was a lesson learned. It took a few years where I nearly gave up and went back to full-time employment.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear as well. And I think, you know, we with StoryCube, especially bang the drum for, you know, being as niche as possible. And Alice, you touched on having a limited, not be doing full service stuff as well. Is that a practical choice just based on positioning, or based on what you knew, or a bit of both probably?
It's a bit of both, I think. So, you know, I started the business sort of very niche in terms of the practice areas, because it was my practice area, basically technology and IP. And I was sort of providing that to all different types of businesses. But then as I hired people with different legal skills, we kind of diversified our legal skills, but we then niched down on the types of businesses that we were working with. So we decided that we really wanted to focus on fast growth businesses. We then made a couple of mistakes as well. I think I over diversified when it came to practice areas, and it became quite difficult to manage the business. The business became too complex. So then we kind of scaled back a little bit, and now we're kind of just focused on doing what we know we can do well, and not overcomplicating and over diversifying things, because I think you know, you can reach the point where actually it's no longer of benefit to the business, it's no longer a benefit to your clients. You have to kind of recognize when you've reached that kind of stage where you're getting the maximum value out of what you're doing. And it's very tempting when you're in a growth phase to just grow for the sake of growing, to just hire more people, and you know, I can open an office in Amsterdam, or I can do this and I can do that. Like, it's all growing, but actually it doesn't always serve you any real purpose. In fact, it can be quite detrimental to you, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I get, you know, really interesting sort of reflecting on the way you've both talked about that, and that, you know, kind of identifying what we're trying to talk about. You're saying, right, there are obstacles that come up, and one of those obstacles is always going to be you to some extent yourself, right? Like your kind of take on what you think you're trying to achieve, and as well as that, what other people around you are trying to take on, but realizing that the way forward is to, you know, is to focus on what it is you can do, that you do well, and to listen back really to probably, you know, why you're there in the first place, right? To reflect on how you got from, you know, the beginning, whatever the sort of evolutionary process that's taken you to today is. And I think sometimes, you know, it's easy for people to lose that. It kind of harks back to the motivations and purpose we talked a bit about in the previous session, but comes to life here, which is very, very interesting. It sounds like to me, you know, you've both got, therefore, quite a strong sense of self-awareness, right? Awareness that's come. Do you think that's something that was always there, or that's something that's been won in the hard knocks? And how important do you recognize that as being, both for yourselves, I guess, and the businesses that you maybe work for? I mean, Manish, maybe from your point of view, that's a more critical thing with the type of work you're doing in boardrooms and whatever. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, you know, I suppose the biggest thing for me, kind of going independent and being self-employed, is actually wholly becoming myself. You know, I worked one agency for 15 years, and I think, you know, it took me a bit of time to sort of decouple myself from the agency and their way of thinking. And so there was a lot of things that I did and the way that maybe I acted with certain people that wasn't really me, but I was kind of following what the company wanted me to do. I was towing the company line. And so it wasn't until I went independent that I realized that actually I've got a set of ethics and values, which are very much mine, which were part there when I was with an agency, but not fully. And so how I would deal with situations wouldn't be the way that I would deal with them. It would actually be the way that I thought the company wanted me to deal with them. And interesting enough, I'm working with a client at the moment, and there's a lady who works for this particular agency who unfortunately I had to make redundant 10 years ago. And when I realized that I had to work with this person again, I was really nervous because I felt quite bad of obviously what happened. It was, things that are out of my control, but I didn't handle that particular situation very well. And so I felt awkward because I thought I'm now going to have to deal with this person that I had to sort of let go. But I didn't handle it particularly well, and I could have handled it better. But I did realize actually after 10 years, they had no issue with it. They had moved on. I felt bad, they didn't. But I did feel I still had to have that conversation to say, look, I'm sorry that I didn't handle that particularly well. This is what I'm about now, and it's quite different. And within our sort of short interactions, she's already noticed a difference. And even though we worked together for like 5 years at the time, she said, I didn't really know the true Manish. It's only now that I've got to know you. And it is different. And I thought, okay, yeah, this is the change. I've now left the company environment. I'm very much on my own, doing my own thing. But what people experience is what I'm about without having to follow any kind of rules or what's expected from me by some employer.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting take. I mean, Alice, you're very open online about the negativity that you receive from who you are, and you've talked about that already. I assume there's a positive side to that, and I hope there's a positive side to that as well.
Yeah, there is definitely. I've got, and I think it was one of the nice surprises that I had when I actually made the jump to start up my business was actually how many people wanted to support me, because up until that point, I didn't really get a lot of positivity. But once I'd actually, people saw that I'd actually committed to it, that I was actually going to make this happen, then there were a lot of people actually rooting for me to be a success. And that continues now. I think, there's always this kind of mentality that you support and root for the underdog. And I think I've very much been seen as the underdog in the legal industry. And there's lots of people that really want the change that I talk about and that I fight for to actually become a reality. And that's meant that I've had a huge amount of support in what I'm doing, which completely outweighs the negativity now.
Yeah, which is always, I think, a good reminder, again, for everyone. It's always, we see it with celebrities, we see it with people we know, and we see it for ourselves. And, one sort of and some negativity can be an obstacle that feels much better. It's like having a bit of grit in your eye, it feels like this huge thing that's causing this big problem. But actually, being able to take that step back and recognize to say, like, it's there, we don't want it, it shouldn't be there. That's a different conversation. But actually, the positivity that comes with it is going to drive you forward too. It's a bit of a trailer. I mean, I think when we talk, Laura knows on the line, who shared some interesting stuff in the chat as well, and Elaine, who we're going to talk to after lunch at sort of 2:00, that will be some interesting part of that conversation too, about who you are as an individual and how you use that to actually go out and connect. So little trailer for you there. I'd like to kind of just shift it to, I guess, both of your professional, what you do, right? Your business is what you give advice. Because while we've got you here, what do you think are the big obstacles that people get stuck on from your, the observation you're having with the people that are coming to your bits to get those solutions? What are the things that they're getting stuck on that is kind of, you feel is relatively universal, I guess? Manish, we'll go back to you.
I would say what I tend to experience a lot is they're trying to solve everything all at the same time. They've got a load of issues. And I think the key thing is really about prioritizing. And really focusing on the ones that are going to have the biggest impact to the business or get them out of a certain position. So, when I talk to clients, they'll hit me with countless things. There'll be one particular trigger, and there's lots of other things that follow that. And what I always recommend is, okay, look, we're not going to solve everything all at the same time. Let's just focus on one or two things which are going to have the biggest impact, and then we'll deal with the other stuff afterwards. They get to a point where there is so much going on, they don't know which way to turn, and then they don't do nothing. Because it just seems like, it's just one thing after the next. And then when you've got that kind of burden, it just builds, and other things get on top of that, and then smaller problems become bigger problems. So I would say, look, let's just talk about what the issues are, but what are the 1 or 2 things that we could be doing, which are the bigger issues that we can solve, that's going to make the smaller problems easier to manage. It's really about prioritization. Trying to solve everything all at the same time, you're just not going to get anywhere. Just focus on the couple of things that you think will have the biggest impact, and let's solve those first before we tackle all the other issues.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess on a more specific, you're obviously working with agencies, service-based businesses.
Yeah.
Is there, I always like to ask this kind of question, is there anything you just see time and time again that you just think, this can be solved so easily, some simple stuff? And I know you deal with everything from helping with the resourcing and recruitment and operational, that kind of element, that you just sometimes think, why doesn't everybody use this piece of software? Why doesn't everybody use this job title or whatever it might be? Because I know we've got a lot of service providers sort of on the call, I think.
It's pretty basic. The one thing I always recommend is just talk and communicate. Because it's amazing where it takes an external person to come along and get a group of people together to just get it out there and just talk about what the issue is. And people are busy. Either they are focused on what they've got to do, or they don't want to rock the boat. But sometimes you just need to have a little bit of internal therapy and just talk about what the issues are. An open conversation. Ideally do it outside of the office environment, in an environment where it's a little bit more relaxed, where you're not less likely to get interrupted, and just talk. And you find out there's a lot of things that can be solved. When I first did out, I used to do quite lengthy audits, just to go through and talk to individuals. And then I found actually what worked better was running it in a more of a workshop environment, and giving it enough time to kind of map out what the issues were, but allowing enough time to just let people talk about what the issues are. And then you find out that half of them get resolved, because I think a lot of issues within service-based businesses is really just down to poor communication. And people just not talking to each other and finding ways around there.
That's the case in life, isn't it? I think as well. You've reminded me of, I don't know if anyone watches Married at First Sight, which is back on TV in the UK, where couples meet for the first time, get married, and then there's a sort of reality show built around it. But you sort of observe these things and going to talk to each other. If you talk to each other about these things, then you'd be able to move forward. But that doesn't make good TV. So they don't want that to happen, of course. Alice, from your point of view, you don't need to feel free to go really specific on the legal stuff, because I know it will probably be interesting on people. But what are those obstacles? Because you're in a great position now, right? You're running this business, observing, like presumably keeping the clients happy, bringing new clients in, and so on. What would you say is the stuff that is just those regular issues that keep coming back that people want to look out for?
There's so many. So I guess protecting intellectual property, trademark infringement, brands not properly protecting their brands and then getting sued for infringement, or that maybe they have protected their brand and they want to enforce their rights. That comes up a lot. Employment issues, we deal with a lot of employment issues, whether it's redundancies or restructuring, employment claims, employment documents, all of that kind of thing. It's really something that most companies with half a brain kind of realize, actually, I shouldn't be trying to figure this out by myself. Really need to get the experts in for that. We work with a lot of companies raising venture capital money. And that's really interesting, because whilst we do the legal work for the actual fundraising, we also get very heavily involved in the due diligence, so preparing the company for due diligence, and that usually uncovers a whole load of problems. They haven't got properly signed contract, they're not complying with data protection legislation, they haven't protected their intellectual property, they haven't, they don't own the code for this technology that everybody's investing in. All of these types of issues that come up and that investors want to be able to understand before they invest. It's a bit like Manish said, you just have this whole long list of things that need to be fixed. But unfortunately, in a lot of cases, there is no option to just kind of say, well, let's just prioritize one or two, because actually they've all got to be fixed before the company can go and raise money, and there's a clock ticking because they're reaching the end of their runway, and it's just all got to be done as quickly as possible, really.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that comes back to awareness, doesn't it? I mean, that's sort of in a situation where you're looking to raise money for venture capital is obviously very different from if you're, you know, you've borrowed some money to start a smaller business or you're bootstrapping or whatever. But the trade-off for that hugely accelerated growth, for being able to, is saying you're going to have to make sure everything is done, right? Everything is got tied up with a proper bow on it, and that's going to require help. And I, you know, then what's interesting to me, and I think with all of this stuff, I think a lot of it's about mindset, isn't it? It's about, from the individual's point of view, or, you know, representing a business or whatever, in saying you need to try and identify what it is what are you trying to do here? What kind of obstacle is this? Is this a kind of this is slowly eroding people's confidence in what we do because we're not really giving big enough, you know, we haven't got enough people to do customer service. That's the obstacle. And actually we're fine, but we're just going to go slowly off a cliff down here. Or as you've just outlined, Alice, is it the kind of, it's like, yeah, but if you don't get this done in 36 hours, you're going to, you know, this is all going to fall through. And, you know, that's the, like, so you need to find a way to deal with that. And then you get help, which is, okay. I think, you know, maybe there's a valid point to make now. You know, it's absolutely normal and okay to ask for help on whatever it is. And that's what service providers do. I'm sure most of you listening, your businesses are providing help to people in different ways. But sometimes, and I like the way you outlined that, manager, sometimes it's like, you just got to sit down and talk and listen. And if that, you know, and understand that maybe that obstacle is you're believing it to be the case, but actually it's something that can be easily sidestepped. On that question of mindset, I mean, Alice, I saw you taught this week on LinkedIn about the support you'd had from your partner, I believe, you know, just in taking you through. And I think it's very easy to get into these conversations and feel when we're in our business mode, I'm sat at my desk and I've got all my screens around me and so on. Downstairs are the kids, right? I don't think they are downstairs, and they've gone out now. I mean, they're 2 and 4. They will have gone out under supervision, hopefully. But you know, you can switch between those two things. And actually sometimes, you know, switching that mindset and not thinking about your what you're trying to achieve in your life from the point of view simply of, it's like, and here is my checklist, and I need to, you know, I've read an article that says I should do this thing, and I went to this talk and Alice and Manish said I should do this thing, and it's very important. Sometimes I think, you know, understanding that you are trying to achieve something that, like, you're trying to move from A to B. And in order to do that, your life needs to be orientated in a way that's actually going to get you into that place as well. And I mean, I guess just because I know we've got a range from solopreneurs through to obviously bigger organizations, do you find that that's something on a personal level that has helped you to go through? And as I say, Alice, I was sort of reflecting on something you posted this week. So I'm interested to your thoughts on that now. And again, for you, Manish, you know, how do you, when as individuals trying to operate businesses, we're not just robots trying to get things through, we're people who need to navigate a whole range of other stuff as well that goes on. I think there was a question in the middle of that, but I think I just got carried away thinking about my little boys. But Alice, does that make some sense? And how would you reflect on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think particularly when you're running a business, but it does also apply to people who are employed in sort of stressful roles, obviously. But I think, you know, when you're running a business, it's very easy to get yourself to the point of burnout, because you can literally, your to-do list is never ending. So it's really, really important that you have a mindset that actually allows you to look after yourself, and to ask for help when you need it, and to make sure that you are building a support network around you. And, you know, since I've started my business in particular, I've been very focused on keeping myself physically fit and healthy. Looking after your mental health is obviously super, super important. And yeah, just generally taking time off to invest in yourself, I think, is really, really important. And it's very easy when you're running your own business to just think that you're not allowed that time, because there's always something that needs to be done. But ultimately, if you're not functioning at 100%, then your business is not going to function at 100%. So, you know, I've learned the hard way, I think, how important it is to take that time out, and look after yourself.
Yeah, great. And Manish, what's your reflection on that?
Well, first of all, I think, you know, I 100% agree with Alice. I think it's so important. And, you know, the reality is that when you are running a show, there's no one telling you that you've got to kind of stop. And I think also now working from home, as we all most of us are, there aren't those sort of boundaries. And so you can carry on working, throughout the evening, and you can start working through the weekend. And, for me, I realized that there was a certain point in the day where I'm at my best. And so there's no point trying to slog it in the evenings. I could have done maybe when I was in my 20s. I work better now first thing in the morning. So if there's any really important task, I'm better off doing it first thing, and then keeping the afternoon for activities that aren't so, challenging from a mental state. But the whole thing around taking time out yourself and, giving yourself permission to go, actually, I am going to go for that walk. I'm going to go and see my friends. And I think you actually find that you become more productive. And I think if you're trying to slog it and work 24/7, 7 days a week, you aren't that productive, and you get yourself in a bit of more of a stressful situation. And I think you just have to, particularly being a solopreneur, to say, look, I've done what I can. I'm going to be better off taking some time out, take half a day out, go for a walk, go and do some exercise, see some friends, whatever it is, and then come back to the task. And the chances are you'll probably get the task done in a much quicker and more effective way. And I think that's something that we've all got to do, because I think we're always on. I'm terrible with my phone. One thing I found that helps me from a productivity standpoint is to put the phone somewhere in a different room, because if it's anywhere near me, I am constantly glancing at it. And I must admit, when it's not with me, I miss it, and I'm kind of looking around. But it's the worst thing from a productivity standpoint, because it's sending me these notifications, which is taking me away from my task. But it means I'm never really switching off. And it's worse in the evenings when I kind of said, I've got kids that, I'm going to sit and watch this film with them. And they will actually take my phone and take it to another room, which is really bad, because they realize that I'm not focusing on the time that I'm meant to be having with them. I'm kind of half there and half not. So I think it's just trying to get those distractions away from you and giving yourself a break, just so you can be more productive as you work.
Yeah, I think recognizing as well those things. I realized relatively recently, I don't know, I'm 39 next week, and you think, how can you not get to these answers a bit quicker? But I absolutely love travel, right? Being in a situation in any vehicle, I just like moving around, and I never really thought about why that was. So when I say travel, not going to, I like going to places. I mean, like the physical activity of moving from A to B. I've always kind of enjoyed that. And then recently, after the pandemic finished, swimming pools opened up again. I started to take my little boy swimming, because he'd never been, because of everything had been shut down. And I was saying to my wife, I was like, God, I love swimming so much. I just love being in that swimming pool and doing things. And reflecting on it, I realized it was because I couldn't be distracted. In those situations, I cannot be distracted, right? I'm in a swimming pool. It's me, it's the pool. I mean, it's a public swimming pool. There's loads of other people there too. But that is what I'm there to do, and I can focus on it and I can enjoy it. And I think, we all know, and I'm surrounded by 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 5 screens in front of me right now. Like, that's not a good thing. That's terrible. Now, they're practical for the purposes of doing this. But actually, understanding what is it, and you've outlined that very nicely for yourself. What is it for you that allows you to recharge, or to take a step back, or to focus, so you can deal with these obstacles? Because again, bringing it all back to this stuff, we're all just, individuals floating through, doing our best, kicking under the water, trying to get things going, no matter where we are in that journey. And, of course, success takes a bit of luck. It takes a lot of hard work as well. And it takes all of these things. So, we get there at those different paces. But fundamentally, when you come up against those obstacles, you've got to be geared up to do it. And I think, I think it's really interesting, those stories reflected on. And I add my own in, because frankly, I'm in charge. No, I'm not. I'm just here for the fun. We're coming to the end of this, so it's really interesting. So I just want to see if there's any practical other tips that you haven't raised so far, because I think I have to ask this. It's always a useful take about that you want to put across that we haven't covered, that people who are sat out there, they've done what you've done. They've started from very little maybe, or they've started off the back of another career, or they've trying something new, and they are, they're thinking, I don't know, I just see all these obstacles in my midst. Are there any practical tips to deal with anything in any way that you'd like to share, that we can give people to take away? You're highlighted in green, Manish, so I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really helped me is being realistic about what I can get done within a day. You did ask about a bit of a software, and I use this thing called Sun Sama. And what it is, it's like a sort of a calendar type thing, but because it works with the applications like I use, like for instance, like Gmail and Todoist and Asana, it allows you to actually plan your day. And when you actually allocate a task to a particular day, you can actually put amount of time that you need to do it. And it's really interesting because you allocate these tasks to a day and the amount of time that you need, and then it calculates how many hours you've given yourself. So when I first started off doing it, it would say, yeah, and it was just like, well, that's not going to happen. And so I had to be a bit more realistic. And so it allowed me to think about, well, what can I really get done with the day? I know I'm more productive in the morning, so okay, I can give myself 4 hours on a particular task. But as I go into the afternoon and less, and I think that's what it's really about. And it touched upon what Alice said, is about being a bit more realistic and giving yourself time out about what you can actually achieve. And I think you've got to be realistic with your day. You know, there is this whole thing around, you know, if you want to be successful, you're going to have to work 24/7, whatever. And I think a lot of that is just rubbish. But it does make you feel kind of guilty that if you're not working 12-hour days, that you're not doing enough to achieve your dream. And I don't think it's about the hours. I think it's about how effective and productive you are. And you can get just as much done in half that amount of time than you would do working 12. So my tip is be realistic for yourself about how productive you are and what you can get done within a day. And don't be hard on yourself if the reality is only 4 or 5 hours in a day, spread across an entire day, instead of feeling you've got to work 12 hours.
Yeah, great. What was the name of that tool?
It's called Sunsama, Sunfana.
I know Michael's probably frantically Googling, trying to find it, throw it in the chat. Can see his face. Alice, any sort of final words to wrap up that you have?
Yeah, I think I've probably got a couple of things. I think on the back of what Manish just said, sorry, I've just pressed the button on my computer. I think he's right that it's probably very easy to overestimate what you can do in a day, but I think equally it's very easy to underestimate what you can achieve in 6 months or a year. So I'm very goal orientated person, and I've got sort of really sort of long-term goals that I focus on, but then I break them down. So I've got, goals for the month, goals for 6 months time or whatever. And then I'm very focused on, well, what do I need to do to make these goals happen? And I've always found that that's really helped me, and it keeps me focused. And, obviously sometimes they change, and that's fine. But just focusing on, well, what behaviors do I need to do? If you're in a position where you're faced with not having enough clients, for example, set yourself a goal of sending 10 emails to potential clients a day, or something like that, that's going to help you to get your business to where you need to be. And then I think my second point would just be that, if you do get a knockback on something, because it always happens. And I think there's two types of people that deal with it. There's the kind of people that get knocked over onto the floor and then they just stay there. And then there's the type of people that get knocked over and then they get back up again and brush themselves off and get on with it. I think, I've got quite a resilient mindset. I still feel emotions if something negative happens, if something bad happens. And, it can take me a little bit of time sometimes to process those and get on with them, sort of move on from that. But I think it's just really important that you kind of just pick yourself up and just keep going. Don't let it stop you.
Keep rolling on. Yeah, fantastic. I absolutely love that point about where it's very human, isn't it? Where we underestimate and where we overestimate what we can achieve, because you're both proof, obviously, of you've described your backgrounds and how you got to where you are today, of coming through a very straight, not silver platters, not as it is, I was given a company and I kind of dwindled it down. You're not Donald Trump, right? You haven't failed a company and still been a millionaire. So it's really interesting to hear, and I think thank you so much for giving us your time today. I know you're both busy people, you've got things to do, and it is always a pleasure to have a chat. So thank you. Michael, I'm sure, will have shared, if he hasn't already, links to both Stevenson Law, to your practice, Manish, in the chat. So if you're interested, of course, and any of those things, do follow up, and I'm sure connect on LinkedIn and all of those things as well. There you go, right on cue. It pops into the chat. We're gonna move to the final piece of this morning session, which has gone very well so far. And I'm going to unspotlight you both and say thank you again.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn, hopefully, to Fee, who I need to find somewhere on this list. Hello, Fee. How are you doing? Is it just yourself that is talking? I think you've got.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's grand. I'll do that. And you should be able to share your screen as well if you want to. Now, Fee is from MariPay, who have been very kindly a great supporter today and have helped us to raise some extra money towards Hatch, who you heard from earlier. And she's going to tell us a little bit about this service, what they do and why it is interesting, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, that was a really interesting chat about obstacles. And I know that when you're running a micro businesses, obstacles find themselves in many types of forms. And hopefully MariPay can help with one of those obstacles being finance. So MariPay believes that micro businesses are underserved and overlooked when it comes to access to finance, payment tools, business support generally. And when we speak with our peers, we realize that late payments to small businesses is a painful and all too familiar cash flow challenge. So we created MariPay, an easy to use invoicing and payments tool where there's no more chasing invoices, no more unpredictable moments, and our platform enables you to get paid on time. Really, it's very simply, in a nutshell, you can get invoices paid up to 10 days earlier, secure, streamlined, and super fast. But what we're really excited about today, and I think some of you might have received this via email already, but if you haven't noticed yet, we do have a very special offer, which is courtesy of the awesome guys at StoryCube, and we're really pleased to be working with Hatch Enterprise as well. If you would like, and you are a micro business, you can scan this QR code that should hopefully be up on your screen now. And it will just take about 60 seconds, glad to know it's up and running, where you can get a free one-to-one finance MOT for your micro business worth £150. So hopefully we'll circulate the link in case any of you don't have your phone right now to give it a go, but we'll leave that up on the screen for a tiny little bit. And you can sign up to that. So thank you so much for having us, and look forward to connecting with all of you later on in the day.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fee, for sharing. And I'll put myself back out there just so we know. And we're now going to move into a break. It's been a busy morning. I'm hungry. So we've been here since 9, some of you. So thanks for joining us for that. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a 10-minute break. We're going to do another speed networking session. If you would wish to join for that, that will be similar to what we did this morning. The focus is going to be just on sharing some ideas around how you generate new business. So if you're interested in sharing with some peers or so on, we will do that. And we'll work out the exact process for that, depending on who's around when we get there. Otherwise, we will kick back in at 2 p.m. With 2 more panels like we've just had, one on connections with Elaine and Laura, I think are on the call or have been on the call. And then afterwards with Susie and Andrew, who will be talking about differentiators before we wrap up for the day. So far, so good. I think, Michael, have you got any comments from your vaunted perspective?
So far, I think it's been really good. So I hope everyone else is enjoying it. Loads of insights, loads of advice. A big thank you to the expert panelists. If you haven't already, please keep an eye on the chat. I've put lots of links in there, tried to sort of add a little bit of colour to what's being talked about, and give you direction on where to look and the agenda for the day. So please keep an eye on that, and we'll see you at 12 for all that want to do the speed networking.
Fantastic. This will keep running. I'll put up a slide, but cameras and stuff will be off until we get to there. All righty. And I'm going to stop the recording at this point.